Welcome to Why I Quit, a show that covers real people quitting their 9-to-5 jobs in search of something different. Listen to inspiring conversations where we dive deep into the stories of why people quit their jobs, what were the hardest parts, where are they now, and any advice for people following the same path. I am so excited to introduce Phil DiMuro as this week's guest on Why I Quit. Learn as Phil discusses his journey of quitting his full-time job to launch a mobile app. Listen to how he describes the reality and sacrifices of becoming an entrepreneur. Get inspired hearing how he used his experiences and his failures to launch a software development agency called Founders Approach that helps other entrepreneurs launch their own mobile apps and websites. Thanks for joining us today, Phil. It's always great to have you.
Absolutely. Definitely excited to be here.
Yeah. So I know some of the listeners may know the backstory between both of us, but for those of you that don't know, Phil and I went to college together at Susquehanna University. We studied abroad together, and then eventually we both quit our jobs to start a business. So Phil and I go way back, and I'm actually really excited to dive in. And I'm sure there's actually still a lot of things that I don't know about your story too. And I'm really excited to dive into the specifics of it.
No, excited. It's funny. Despite the fact that we've known each other for probably half our lives at this point, I feel like we still learn stuff about each other.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you are heading into college, what is your mindset at that point in terms of like where you see your career going?
Yeah, so it's interesting you say it too, because I ended up like really falling in love with doing bar backing and bartending, and that I felt fit like what I was doing. I loved being social. So I did a few other jobs in restaurants. I worked under some incredible bosses over at one of my restaurants, Gracie's, and she still kept me all the way through college. I would come home and work for her whenever I had opportunities, and I really respected her because she had this concept where she was a chef owner and she was always there, you know, working on her business. But, you know, at the end of the day, she always said, you're never too big for any job. So at the end of the night, you know, she's done cooking, but we're still cleaning. She would come out there and put her hands in the dishwasher and clean dishes with the bussers who are making minimum wage. And I think that camaraderie really taught me what I wanted to look for in jobs. And during college, I kind of brought that with me where I always had that where I could work that on the side. And then I wanted to get into some other venues where I worked in restaurants, but maybe let's try some other things. So I worked a little bit for a nonprofit during an internship for the entrepreneurial sector, which was great. And then on another summer, I ended up working with the Navy. So I kind of got that military side of it and had a lot of outlets to try different things and sample it.
As you graduate college and get into your first job, you know, what did your day-to-day and kind of roles and responsibilities look like?
As any college kid, I think approximately when we were graduating, 2012 period, you know, coming out of the financial crisis, you know, a couple years had gone by, so it was coming back to life. There were people who were getting good jobs, but it was definitely still, I feel like, really difficult. I was really nervous because I felt like I had a decent resume and I had applied for over 100 things probably, but nothing felt like it was coming together. And had a friend of mine at school suggest, hey, my brother works for Sam Adams, Boston Beer Company. Why don't you go check out a job with them? And I just was lucky that I was kind of in the room when that conversation happened because they were talking to someone else. And I said, well, what about me? Would that be a good opportunity? He said, yeah, for sure. Sure enough, got the interview, ultimately ended up getting the position, but I didn't get it until I think 2 days before graduation. So I got to at least give my mom the nice call where he said, hey, mom, I'm actually going to walk at school with the job. So that made her very happy.
As you get started at Boston Beer, how did it match up with your expectations? And, you know, what did your day-to-day look like?
So I think right out of college, one of the hardest things is you go from this incredible environment where you're constantly surrounded by people. You live with your best friends or within a 2-minute walk of your best friends, and you have so much freedom. I think looking back, I didn't realize how much great time we had to experiment with things. And coming out of college, you realize, wow, like this is not the easiest. I remember it was like 2 months into it. I had been working full time for a couple months now. And I just remember being like, is this really it? Like, is this what it's going to be like every single week? Because especially when you're fresh into it, you're really pushing hard for those jobs. So I was in the role of a brewery representative. So my day-to-day was basically, I didn't have an office to show up from. I worked out of my car, my home, but my expectation was I was supposed to be always on the streets. So I'd be calling on liquor stores, I'd be calling on restaurants and bars. And I will say it was a great first out of college job because you had a lot of perks within that industry. And it also gave me a lot of times to see not only one, business owner, but I got to see hundreds throughout a month. I got to see how they ran their business and how they made decisions about where to put beer because it made the most profit for them. And that kind of opened my eyes to entrepreneurship more and more. And the job luckily gave me that ability too, where I could work completely on my own schedule. And as long as I hit my bonuses and reported to my boss, they were happy with me.
And at this point, are you thinking you're going to be with Boston Beer for a long time? Are you experimenting with different ideas or thinking about other jobs? Or where's your head at that point?
When I graduated school, I graduated with entrepreneurship and marketing, were my 2 degrees. And I always knew I wanted to be in that space, but I never knew the right opportunity, what it was going to be. So what I thought was, let's get some experience. Let's work another job. I got really lucky that Sam Adams invests a ton in the first year, 2 years, and really training their team members. And I think I learned a lot from that. What ends up happening, though, is you start seeing it and you see, career path individuals where it was incredible because you could see people that have been in the company 15, 20 years. Sam Adams has been around for a while, but, in reality, it's not a massive, massive company that's been around for 100 years. So you saw these people that were making huge impacts, but I also at the same time knew that my trajectory was linear. It was okay, you go from this role as a brewery rep, you get a little promotion there as a senior brewery rep, but you're still doing the same job. Then you get, that next level, that next district manager level, right? And to do that really is you either got to wait for the person who has your market to move on in their career, or you have to be comfortable completely switching and moving to a different country or a different state. And I was kind of torn between it. I really wanted it, but I also stayed there for, I think it was 3 years because I knew my boss was right at that promotional period too. So I waited there for a longer period of time solely because I was really hoping to get the job of my bosses and ultimately interviewed for it.
At this point, would you say you're enjoying the work? Are you passionate about it? Do you feel like it's a means to an end and you're going through the motions? Or where do you think you're at that point?
So I enjoyed a lot of aspects of the job. A few things were, it's got an incredible entrepreneurial founder, Jim Cook, who has an incredible story, and got to meet him in person at college. It was kind of an inspiration of why I wanted to interview there. And I really felt that they embodied a lot of the concepts of entrepreneurship into their day-to-day. So that was one of the perks I liked of it. I also loved the craft beer industry. This was 2016. So this is like craft beer's second big boom, right? Everyone was buying 6-packs. Everyone was talking about what the new craft beer was going to be. There was zip code breweries that were like popping up everywhere and only serving that zip code that they were in. So it was really exciting. And we were also one of the premium companies there because we were launching, we had Sam Adams, we had Angry Orchard that was getting really, really popular at that same time. So there was a lot of, cash flow coming into the company. And I think because of that, they were reinvesting it in training people and getting us up to speed with what the new products are going to be and researching new products like Truly, which, I remember early on and just the idea of it being talked about. And then I left, and a couple years later, they come out with it. And now it's like number 2 seltzer brand.
At what point do you start thinking about different ideas or entrepreneurial ideas? Is that something that, you were thinking about from the beginning of like after you graduated college and you're playing with different ideas? Or, was there like a specific time period when you really started diving into that side of it?
Yeah, so I think entrepreneurs, a lot of times, they need to feed an itch, right? And that itch will be like a challenge, whatever it might be. And for me, I was getting a lot of that challenging aspects of my job. It was difficult. I had a ton of perks, but it was challenging. There were a lot of hard sales I had to make. There were a lot of difficult problems I had to resolve. Sam Adams, I think, did an excellent job of giving you opportunities. Like there's a test inside of the beer industry called the Cicerone Test, which basically is like, really how it's the SATs for beer, essentially. And they would sponsor you to go take it if you wanted to. So there was like a 6-month period. I was reading beer books, I was sampling, I was doing blind taste testing, and that fed that itch for me for a while, and I really enjoyed it. But then once I finished that, it was really thinking, okay, am I going to go for this promotion? What does it look like? And there came a point when my boss decided to move in. She got promoted. She was incredible. What ended up happening was that opportunity opened up for myself. And I was younger than I probably should have been at the time to interview for it, but I had great experience in the market. I had great trust with the local distributor, and I prepared really, really hard for that interview, and ultimately, sadly, went in and I thought I killed the interview. I felt really, really confident about it, but I ended up losing the job to someone who had more tenure from a different market. And when they ended up becoming my boss, it was a good working relationship, but it made me feel like I didn't want to move. I had already made a little bit of ties in Baltimore. So that period of time, the next 8 months, started really thinking on the sides, the late nights, the weekends, what's an idea we could launch? And that's where our first idea, Loophole, kind of spun out of.
Talk to me about kind of like the origins behind that, and when did it start, and what were some of like the initial steps that you took during that process?
Yeah, so as with any entrepreneur, most of the time you have an idea and then you quickly realize, like, I have no idea how to do this. And then you start questioning, okay, what are the steps? What's step one? And for me, first step one is just have the idea. And for me, the idea spun out of really calling on these restaurants all day, every day. I was constantly in bars and restaurants. And then when we'd come home, my wife, who was in grad school, would come home from school and be like, oh my God, like this was a wild day. Like, who's got a wine special tonight? I need to go out and let's go get a half price bottle. And then she'd be like, you're in restaurants all day. How do you not know where it is? And I was like, you're right. Like I see these chalkboards, I see the advertisements all over, but I can't remember. So really came the idea of why don't we build some sort of mobile app that pulled all that data into one spot, all the stuff that you can't get necessarily from Yelp or Google at that time, but you really want to know, I want to go out for a craft beer special, or I want to go out for a wine place that also has live music tonight. It was always special oriented. And that step in that first direction was, okay, now step one, we had the idea. Step two is we got to figure out how to build an app. And that just went to Google and constantly was looking up and searching the basics of it. And I think, honestly, Google has done more for the entrepreneurial community than I think college has ever done, solely because if you have the drive and want to search for an answer, most of the time you can find it, decently easily. And if you follow that path down enough times, you'll all of a sudden start becoming that, realizing, hey, I actually do have some sort of expertise in this area. And that was what happened with us, was figuring out, how do you find developers? How do you end up building your app? How do you market it? How do you legally register an LLC? All those questions that run through your mind, really, we turn to Google, YouTube, and friends and colleagues.
And so as you are getting more involved in this process, how was the balance between your full-time job and working on that on the side?
I always recommend to people to don't just quit your day job. It's way too easy, right? Because the quick thing you realize when you quit your day job is money does not come in anymore. Every 2 weeks, you do not get a paycheck. And that's a really, really hard thing. And for us was, okay, let's take some time. We got late nights and weekends. Why don't we try and find people that can work similar schedules and can make this work? And it ended up working perfectly for us because we were bootstrapped. So we were really tight on budget. So we ended up having to try and find a quality outsourced team, but we knew kind of there was a lot of horror stories. So we said, let's interview a ton. So we interviewed like 30 companies and we followed up with a ton of them. We worked our way down. We asked mentors on what we should do, and ultimately ended up finding a dev team that was working the complete opposite schedule. So it ended up working well for us in the very beginning because it literally let me do my day job and then let me still have some fun time and family time, but then also doing the late nights and weekends really to get our first app built. And when it got to the point that I knew, hey, I have this app ready to, within a couple months, it's going to be live. And we're doing our beta tests and we're having some good feedback. But on the flip side, I'm not super fulfilled as much as I used to be in work. I don't feel like I have this challenge. I always said I wanted to be an entrepreneur. Like, why is now not the right time? And I just kept questioning that in my mind until finally I said, all right, like, let's make the jump. Let's make the decision to quit your job. And it timed perfectly with when we were finalizing our beta test and going live with our app to the Baltimore market.
Did you have a specific moment or a plan of, okay, I'm going to quit my job when I reach X amount of savings, when we're going live? Or, what was the exact plan behind that?
For entrepreneurs, a lot of times the typical recommendations of what to do don't always fit like what an entrepreneur might want to do, because the typical recommendations a lot of times is, okay, like fully fund your 401k, invest everything you can in these things. And that's what I was doing. I was also paying down my college debt. I highly recommend right out of college, you're never going to be willing to live as cheap as possible. So I found an apartment in Baltimore that my girlfriend at the time, now wife, we were splitting, and it was like, $300 a person to do it, which let me basically put a ton of money into paying off my student debt and things like that. But, when it came to the time of Loophole, we were investing in the app development. We were putting money towards it. We were self-funded for the initial start. So really, I only had a couple grand in my account at that time that was liquid that I could use. The rest was 401k stuff that I really didn't want to touch if I would get in trouble. So ultimately launched it without a perfect plan, but I knew it was the right time because I was confident that, hey, I can drive Uber and Lyft. Hey, I can work side gigs. Maybe I'll pick up bartending again. I can piece together enough money to live as long as I keep living the same lifestyle, which isn't glorious by any means, but it reminds me of the trenches and it makes me feel really good thinking back about those moments.
Yeah, it's super interesting because I think a lot about that in terms of, would I have done the same process during that of would have quit at the same time, or should we have kept our jobs a little bit longer and kept going on the side? Do you have a thought process if you would have done anything different?
The biggest thing I'd say is I was really fearful of quitting. Despite having an entrepreneurial background, despite launching small businesses throughout college and early on, even high school, I was raised in a very supportive family for entrepreneurship, and I was still deathly scared of quitting. And it was because I felt like I was letting down my boss, who I had a really good relationship with. And I still to this day remember, I probably put it off an extra month, which was great because I got a little bit extra income. But on the flip side, there was definitely this crunch period where I was just drained because I was doing so many things. And I still to this day remember one of the best things I tell a lot of people that are going through the entrepreneurial journey is document it for yourself, because there's these moments in life that are incredible to look back on. And I don't know what inspired me to do this because I didn't think like this back then, but I was going in, basically my quitting day was my performance review. It was basically every 6 months they come in and you go in and you do your 6-month review. They give you challenges. You get a raise if you've done well. And I had been doing really, really well up to that point. And I just felt horrible because I was this is going to be a shock to them and my bosses. And, whatever inspired me, but I'm sitting in the car before we go in for this interview. And I took out my phone, which was probably a BlackBerry at that time. And I just started recording a video of myself just talking through how I was feeling. And it's a 2.5 minute video that still to this day, it's one of my favorite possessions that I own. I have it saved in multiple places so it never gets erased. And really that video is just me being super honest, just saying, I don't know if this is going to work. I'm extremely nervous that I'm not going to have the support I hope to from friends and family. I'm nervous I'm not going to have money. I need money to live. I'd have a job since I was 16 years old. And now all of a sudden I'm not going to have a paycheck. This is just a wild concept. But at the same time, I remember saying in the video, I'm confident that I'll figure it out, right? Through this journey is something I need to go through, because if I'm not going to do it now, when am I going to do it? I'm not going to want to do this later in life when things are even more complicated. And I think looking back, that was the only thing I was, fearful of, is I was nervous how they'd take it. And I remember playing it out a million ways in my brain. And then I get in there and, early on they say, hey, you're doing amazing. What's your career trajectory? What are you looking to do? And I was like, guys, this might be a surprise, but I'm honestly not going to continue. And I did this within the first couple minutes of being there. I was I don't want to drag everyone through this whole experience. And it went from being wait, what's going on? And then being tell us about it. And then I had a 2-minute conversation about it, what I've been working on the side. And they were oh, we get it. So are you, and I remember my boss said, are you 100% committed to this? And I was yes. And she goes, okay, so really, Phil, you're going to do incredible. This is you. I've been managing you for 2.5 years. This is perfect for you. And I was so surprised that she took off the Sam Adams hat and became the supportive person that I had always known there as. And that to me still to this day has just been one of the bedrocks of why I felt hey, there's a community around you that does support you. And at the end of the day, that's a great job. I loved that job, but someone else can go enjoy that job too. So I definitely think that was my only change looking back.
And so as you get started with Loophole, now you don't have a salary. Now you are, officially quit with Boston Beer. How did that first year live up to your expectations of what you thought it was going to be?
Immediately it hits you like a truck. All of a sudden you have Monday morning, you wake up and you're I don't have to do this thing for 8 to 10 hours today. What am I going to fill my time with? And it's the complete lack of structure that's a little nerve wracking. And you start getting your feet under you. You realize, hey, just take what you're already doing and just multiply it, add more of that time towards it. And it was perfect because it was literally timed within 2 weeks of us actually launching the app in the city. So we were doing promotions, we were doing events, we were working crazy hours. So it was a little bit of a distraction from the fear set of like, I used to go from the regular jobs where every Thursday you check your bank account. You know how much is coming in there for the paycheck, but like you just want to make sure it comes in. So all of a sudden being like, you're so busy, you're not even looking at your bank account, which is nerve-wracking when it starts going in the opposite direction from you.
And so, as Loople's growing in that initial first year, 2 years, is there a specific high point that you can think of during that time period?
So a piece of advice I heard once that's really stuck to me because I think it's insanely accurate is everyone always says like entrepreneurship is highs and lows. It's a roller coaster. But what they don't tell you is literally how close in time the highs and the lows are. Like you'll wake up in the morning and say, this is the best idea I've ever had. This app's going to raise a bunch of money. We're going to be this is incredible. Everyone's going to use it. And then by like noon, you got like one email from a customer or a user who left you a 1-star review. And you're like, why did I do this? I should never have quit. This is the worst idea in the entire world. And then like you're constantly going through this. So one of the best things I had was honestly for you guys, I was going through this with Dave and another co-founder. So we had camaraderie. I give a lot of credit to any entrepreneurs who are solo entrepreneurs because it is really difficult. So you have to have a lot of emotional stability to go through it. You find that in a business partner or a physical partner in your life, whatever it might be. But it's really hard and it's insanely lonely if you're doing it alone. It's lonely even when you're doing it with people because all you're doing is working and not actually, hanging out like you used to. I'm
curious in terms of how do you think your day-to-day and your like overall like weekly hours compared? A lot of times you end up working more. So like what was that like for you?
Another one of your interviews, Ian mentioned this. I thought it was really accurate. Was realizing in your life you probably have periods of time you're going to over-index on certain things. And for me, I knew my 20s I wanted to over-index on work. Like I do get a lot of fulfillment. I get a lot of gratification of feeling like I did a good job at this event, whether it was at Sam Adams or Loople. So early on, I kind of knew that I was going to put in those hours. And those first few years, the time was basically it didn't get less. It basically took the time I was already working on it, right, which was let's call it like 20 hours a week. And now you also have your regular hours back from your full-time job. So you add that in. And at the end of the day, you're just working a lot, but it's really motivating work. Like there's some of these days, like especially when we were launching, there were like weeks that you weren't getting good sleep. It wasn't healthy habits that I don't encourage at all, but they're also some of my fondest memories. You talk about the highs, Dave, and I think like there were pitches where you and I would go to and I would leave those pitches being like, this was I can't believe how much I've become a good speaker or how good I am at telling the story of it. And when you get checks from an investor, even if they're small amounts, like they're still like, wow, someone else believes in this idea as much as I do. So all of those moments were highs. But on the flip side, for every one check you got 60, 70, 80 no's immediately set to you. For every like person that left a good review, there were 3 people who left a bad review. Even if there was just as many good review people out there, you don't leave a review if it's good. Like people only want to say negative things in reality because that's when you do go complain. So there's a lot of that difficult periods, and that's why you need a strong support system to be around you during that time period.
As Loople was growing, I know there was points that, we reached 50,000 users, we had expanded into new cities. Talk to me a little bit about kind of like the transition point, because I know a lot of times entrepreneurs like really struggle with when to quit, even a business or idea. Like there's sometimes that like there's not a viable business model or things like that. So, was there like a specific moment or a specific thing that, kind of led you to know that it was time to move on?
Once you get into it and you're doing the entrepreneur story, like I think a lot of times entrepreneurs think they can outsolve every single problem, right? And there's a lot of problems that are in product market fit, like things that just don't work because the market isn't ready for it. The market doesn't think like you. A lot of times we always say that your worst beta tester is your mom, because your mom's going to say she loves it. They're going to say it's amazing. Like your best friends will lie to you, say they downloaded the app and they never actually downloaded it. You can see that on your end. But in reality, what you start realizing is there's a lot of things you might not be able to overcome. Even money, like raising another round of funding, doesn't perfectly overcome it. And I really tell entrepreneurs early on was, I think you and I decided we need to figure out what's not going to let us prove this idea right or wrong. We need to do it quick because like our bank accounts are going down, things like this. And what we ended up saying was, okay, we needed revenue, right? And what we started doing was, okay, well, where are we going to get revenues from? And if our app's about finding bar specials, let's go talk to bar restaurant owners. And you quickly realize, like, hey, they'll sign a commitment to help you advertise your company, but they're not going to sign up and pay you $50 a month. And you're like, wow, but we can see them paying for all these other services. Why not us? And you realize, wow, like, this is not the revenue model. So then you start pitching other options. You say, okay, well, users aren't going to pay for this. Maybe there's some premium features, but it's not really there yet. So then we went to my background in the alcohol beverage industry, and I said, well, maybe the brands will sponsor it. At that time at Sam Adams, I was using these tools to collect data in my market about what the specials were. And I was literally doing it in Excel and spreadsheets, when in reality, you and Loophole could pull and see, hey, is Miller Coors gaining or losing specials in the Baltimore market? There was a big analytics and data play. So we started pitching that, and it was still difficult, but we started getting, 5K checks, 6K checks, 10K checks, but it just wasn't enough to allow for the revenue model to build. And we had to sit down and say, hey, we have this weird catch-22 with our revenue model where we need users to have the advertisers, but we need advertisers so we have money to go get the users. And that is a really hard thing to prove. And that's why a lot of this type of idea has existed in the past. And a lot of entrepreneurs I speak to today, we get pitched this idea constantly just because it's such a use case that a kid out of college who's fresh in entrepreneurship wants to launch. And it makes sense.
That process of moving on from Loophole when, we started transitioning into a founder's approach, how difficult was that for you? Like, I know it was really tough for me. I think admitting that something didn't work, or, talking to investors, or, just like letting go of this like dream that we had. I mean, what was that experience like for you?
So we talked about highs and lows, and I think this is an excellent point, because this was probably one of the biggest lows I remember in my entire life. Was one, I loved having you as a business partner during this process because I think we can balance each other out. I think I am the ever optimist that I think I'll solve every single problem, even though I know I can't, right? And I think you help being like, let's be realistic here. What is it? And there was like a clear moment when you and I were just struggling. So many no's. This wasn't making sense. The money in the bank accounts were going down. It was not going the best in all of our stuff. And you're giving your all to your business, so your relationships are suffering. I don't think we saw friends for like 2 years during this period of time, and our significant others weren't seeing us. It was not the best period of time. And you realize, like, what's the out here? What's the next step? And I still to this day remember when you wrote an email, and it was like it says like midnight thoughts because I can't go to bed. And every entrepreneur has that. I think every person in the world who works on these ideas has these ideas that come in and they can't sleep. They're just going to be up all night thinking about it. And it was literally a perfectly written email justifying everything we've done, not discrediting what we've built by any means, but also saying, like, if we need to prove it, here's what we need to do next. And what's the probability that we can actually do that right now? And that was like a real moment when I remember sitting there reading it and being like, he's right. We need to figure this next step out. And it's painful because you've invested everything you have basically in it, not only money, but your relationships, your family, your friends. Were our first round of funding after ourselves was family and friends. And then we had our incubator program that gave us money. So there's a lot of stress that all this stuff is gonna work out. And I was really nervous for that, to be honest.
Tell me a little bit about, the origins of Founder's Approach and, kind of like, what were your expectations heading into that?
Really what spun out was Dave and I had been taken out of our 401ks, had been, no money in the bank account. I had opened a PNC credit card through a friend because I could get 16 or 18 months with no interest. And I was like, this is my backup plan. I'll put money on a credit card, not pay interest. And I got 16 months to go figure this out. And then all of a sudden you start realizing like that credit card's getting really heavy, and I'm doing Lyft and Uber on the side, but I'm not making as much money as I was hoping to do. And it gets really, really stressful from that period of time. And what we started realizing is we said, well, we need to make money somehow. And what we realized was one of our highs and lows was we had a verbal commit that someone was going to invest $250K in our idea. And I remember you and me like cracking a beer and thinking we literally had just raised their next round, and we were going to expand to the West Coast. We were going to do all this really cool stuff that money would allow us to do. And then over months of trying to close the deal with them, it became more and more obvious, hey, he doesn't want to invest in your idea. He wants you to help him with his idea. And it was funny because there was a moment when we said, listen, like, okay, so it's obvious you're not investing. Like, let's just cut this. And he was like, no, like, let me pay you to work for me. And we said, no, we're not going to do that. We don't want to get another boss. That's not what we want. And we thought about it and we said, well, why don't we just pitch him that we'll build this app for him? We have the developers. We have people that we've been able to build systems. We've learned how to outsource effectively without getting burned. And ultimately it came down to the idea that all of a sudden we pitched him that. And 2 days later we had a wire into our account. And I was like, he's like, where do you wire it? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, we have to go figure this out. And that was literally the spinning point of Dave and I being like, okay, this pays the bills, services allows us to continue on. That was where the switch started happening. And I think that's why I really encourage people to follow entrepreneurial tendencies in general, because, if you're willing to keep your costs low, live like a frugal life, you're going to figure something out. Your first idea might fail, but if you stay willing to move and light on your heels and pay attention to what the market actually wants and not what you think the market is, there'll be an opportunity that probably pops up as long as you're learning a skill that's marketable to other people.
So as Founders Approach is growing and taking on more different clients, what did you take from both of your Boston Beer and Lupul experience while building Founders Approach? And how did those kind of tie together?
Yeah, I really heard this put really well once, which is something no one can take from you is your mind and your experience and your skills, right? Like, you can lose a job, you can get fired from a job, but if you have skills from that job, you can go take them somewhere else. Like, you want to move countries, right? Well, like, if you have skills, those skills are probably global in a lot of cases, and that can move even if your job can't. So what I really recommended to people is think about that every step. Like, at Sam Adams, I learned how to sell. Like, they invested heavily in getting us in sales courses and understanding how to work and negotiate, how to take a buyer who's nervous and they're like ready to fight you because they don't want to buy anything from you, and how to de-escalate it so that all of a sudden they feel more comfortable with you. They taught me a lot of really good skills about how to listen better. All those things completely applicable to Lupul, completely applicable to Founders Approach, completely applicable to all these different ideas that we've kind of launched on the side. And I would say that there was a lot of that. The second was, from the Lupul days, you have to get out there and just put your name out there. We were 2 years into Lupul at this point, so 2 years without a paycheck. But at 2 years in, you kind of get used to not having a paycheck. You start getting used to the idea of like, hey, what's this thing in my corner of my house I'm not using? Maybe I can sell it for $50 online. Those are the things that I think you start learning of how to be frugal, how to be super cost conscious, and how to build apps. And I remember to this day, one of the potential investors laughed at us. They said, you have 3 full-time developers and this is how much you're paying on it? And we're like, yeah. And they're like, this isn't real. There's no way that's in. I'm like, you're using the app right now. You feel, you can tell it. Like, obviously this is coming from someone who got burned because they didn't do the proper procedure to find and identify a good value.
Also, in terms of like Founders Approach, I know something that we discuss a lot is trying to build, a company that we want to work for, right? I think like something that we struggled with, and we talk about this a lot with Lupul, is that we worked ourselves to death. We were working nonstop, and, it kind of like, relationships suffered, and, our personal health suffered, and like things like that. Talk to me a little bit about how you prioritize, like what things were important to you, not just work and kind of in life, and then how that translates into, kind of like building a company around that.
No, I think it's excellent, because I also think the like hustle culture that's pumped into us like is real. And I think it's okay to over-index on that if you really get benefit from it. But if you're just being brainwashed into it, like, don't like recognize that, because it's not always healthy, right? If you're thinking you can't sleep at night because of this stuff, no, that's not a good concept. And you touched on it perfectly. Health suffered, right? So like, I gained a ton of weight, and like I started getting like heart palpitations that I wasn't having, like, because I was so stressed and I wasn't sleeping, and there were all these bad things that were leading to bad outcomes. And when you're young, you don't realize, I feel like, that, those small things you do daily that you change in your habit, all of a sudden over a couple years start adding up, and all of a sudden they start compounding on you. And that's never a good thing. And there's always these points when you need to sit and reevaluate, like, am I doing the right thing? Is this a sustainable lifestyle? If it's not a sustainable lifestyle, let's change it. And I think you said it perfectly about making a job you want to work for, because I think it's so easy just to follow down the rabbit hole of you own your own business, so you can work 24/7. You're never not able to work if you wanted to. But I remember you said a perfect thing, Dave. Like, we've been friends for so damn long, and you had a moment when you said, like, a couple years into it, at Founders Approach, Phil, like, when was the last time we just like chatted about how our weekends were? And I was like, shit, you're right. Like, we don't talk about it. Like, I know nothing about your family. I know nothing what's going on right now. Like, I don't feel like a good friend, despite the fact that we've spent hundreds of hours together in the last 6 months. And that was that moment when you start realizing, like, okay, what do you really care about? Is it, your business is one part of it, but if you want to do it for the long term, there's no way you can over-index on business for a long period of time and make that sustain if you're not going to be willing to give up friends, give up family, give up everything. And I don't think anyone wants to do that. I don't think that's sustainable over a 10, 20-year period. And that's the game we're in. We're trying to build businesses for our entire life and not need another paycheck again.
Yeah, and I think it's super interesting because I think a lot of times, obviously this podcast is the theme of like quitting, but like I think at the end of the day, a lot of it has to do with changing the scenario that you're in, right? So I think like a perfect example of this is that we've changed the structure, the culture, and the setup of Founders Approach lots of times to like better fit our lifestyle. And I think like a lot of times, it's based on like different priorities. Do you want to travel more? Do you want to work remote? Do you want to spend less time working each week? Or, like, do you need to make more money? And on your end, what are some of the priorities that you started to like value more? And then how did that kind of like shift your day-to-day of Founders Approach?
We were talking about over-indexing in certain areas, and I think I'm a big believer when people say like, oh, I have work-life balance. I don't think that's what it is. I think it's work-life harmony, right? Where I think you're seeing this nowadays where we're doing Zoom calls, everything's remote. Our entire company has been remote ever since we've been doing this kind of stuff. We have an office, but it's always been optional for people to show up there. And I think that's allowed for us to be this remote-first company where it makes me question nowadays, there's a lot of companies that are forcing people to come back to the office despite the fact that some people want a hybrid lifestyle from it. And because what's it do? It eliminates their commute most days. But then on the flip side, I don't think anyone fully wants to work from home constantly. I'm going nuts working out of our office constantly. So I think you have this hybrid model where, okay, what's important to that individual, especially if you're you're hiring someone, what's important to this individual? And then how do we cater the job as best we can to what it is? Maybe this person values working from home because they just had a kid and like they need to be around. Well, that's great. Maybe you can set their job up to be a little bit, completely remote, and then also allow it to be somewhat flexible. So there's not as much meetings, right? You work asynchronously. So, hey, I can still get work done, but I don't need to be sitting on a meeting with you to actually have it happen. So I think the big pillars in people's life is really usually family, or I'm just going to group them all together as in like connection, like your significant other, your friends, like you have that sense of connection that you get that you really don't always get from other areas. Then you do usually in the US have like the career path. It's very ingrained in you to have something focused there. And then on the flip side, you also have this like finance piece of it where it's like you need to be able to save money or else you can't live in this world. So I think I always say one of the hardest things is like those three parts of it, one of them can always be pulled at any given time, right? The hardest part, though, is when you start seeing two things get pulled. So, like, an example is, okay, maybe my relationships are suffering, but, like, my business is doing well, my career's doing well, so I have a little bit more money. Well, maybe you can be more thoughtful with that money. Maybe you can do some things that are really caring for that person because you have some resources of money. Or on the flip side, you're starting your own business, you have no money, but you have time all of a sudden. Well, now use that time to your advantage. Plan something that's helpful. Take the time when you would be commuting or something to call a friend and just make that, keep that connection going. The hardest part, though, is a lot of times in your life, both of the, like 2 out of 3 of them get pulled at the same time. And that's really unstable. Like that can be done, but for a very small amount of time. So I really question entrepreneurs to think about those as their priorities in their life and recognize that, like, at the end of the day, you need to feel like you are working towards something, but not also losing every other aspect of yourself in it.
And so talk to me a little bit about what is your ideal style of work and kind of like what's your goal, like especially going into 2022 of, I love how you said like work-life harmony. What's your goal of like going about achieving that?
I think what we always talk about too is one of the perks that we have from Founders Approach is we have been remote first. So anywhere I have this computer in front of me and my phone, and internet access, I can work. So I love traveling, right? But also when I'm traveling, I've never subscribed to this idea that like you have to completely cut off of work while you're doing it. Because like to me, I love going on trips. Like my wife and I just went over to London. And one of the best parts about it was, in the morning, I'm an early riser. So I got up, I come out down to the DiMuro, the hotel lobby. I open my computer. I'm knocking out emails, doing all this stuff for like 2-3 hours as she's waking up, getting herself day. And then I said, okay, I don't have meetings anymore for the rest of the day because I planned it that way. So now I'm closing my computer. I'm going to be off, and I just sign off and I message the team saying, hey guys, sorry, not going to be available. So at least the team knows. So for me, my ideal idea is I can keep that going, but I also still do get the personal aspect. Like I love being able to meet up with you in person, and I love the face-to-face. I think Zoom only does so much. And that's why I really do believe in this hybrid continuation workforce, where I think there's going to be people in corporations whose sole job is to facilitate remote workers, right? Like imagine that being a role at a company, and all they do is say, hey, John doesn't have a fax, he's remote, but he needs it, he'll PDF it to me, I'll fax it out, right? Whatever that might be, they're just a middleman. They're facilitating the work from home people. And I've been a big believer where when I worked with other careers in the past, a lot of times they say, okay, you can have one remote day every other week. And that never made sense to me, because what does that mean? Well, that means that one remote day is now my free day. Like I can mess around. I'm not as stressed on that day. Like it's not that. Versus if you have a job where you say like, hey, we have the office for you, but we also know that you can do it. We'll set you up so that you can work from home incredibly well, right? Well, then all of a sudden it's not seen as a free day anymore. It's just seen as work. And when you have that, then you can start prioritizing for that individual. Like, hey, yeah, I know I need to be online because our devs are online like 6 a.m. to like 10. That's my dime. I'm going to get the best amount of work out of myself and moving projects forward. And then on the flip side, I can take control of that and say, okay, well, if I want to go put in laundry or cook breakfast, lunch, dinner, whatever it might be, I know the schedule myself. So that's really making it all work synergistically together rather than having work and life pull at each other.
I know there's a lot of listeners out there who have either recently quit their jobs or they're thinking about potentially quitting their jobs. What is a piece of advice, or something you wish you knew before you took the leap?
A lot of it comes down to, for me, is having a support system that you can rely on during this period of time, because it's not easy. Like the belief that launching a business is this glorious thing that you post about and you see on Instagram from people raising money and doing all this stuff like that. That's a lie. It's a facade. Yes, it might happen, but that's 1% of the time. The 99% is the tranche that is not the fun part. And I always like to say with entrepreneurs, don't be afraid to be real with each other, because we used to see this all the time. You'd go to a networking event and, oh, how's your business doing? Oh, incredible. We just, raised the money. Oh, it's great. We just hit a new milestone with our users. Yeah, what they're not telling you is like the entire business on the inside's on fire, and they're just constantly trying to figure it out. But like they feel like they can't put that facade on. And I think some of the best people I've met through this entire program, I know some of them you've interviewed even, Dave, have been some of my favorite connections, because we were always real with each other. They would say, hey, congrats. I saw you got the write-up in the Baltimore Sun. And then I would say, yeah, but oh my God, man, we have this huge issue where our retention rate's not good on our user base. And then you start actually talking about it, because everyone has their own set of problems. So I would say really, really work to create that sense of community in this and this support system, because at the end of the day, you can at least fall back on that when you need help throughout the entire journey.
Going off on that, I think that talking about that communication piece of like entrepreneurs being real with each other. I think on the flip side, that's kind of like the goal of this podcast too, but for quitting, right? Like we want to make the conversation more real and more open, right? I think a lot of times people are afraid to talk about work, or they're afraid to talk about potentially quitting or any of these things. But, at the end of the day, having these conversations leads to opportunities, right? The more you talk through it, the better you can learn from people who've done it before. The more you can plan and learn from the mistakes of people like us who, should have done things differently along the way. And I think the ultimate goal is to, build a community of people, because I think at the end of the day, like people want to help each other and like want to help each other out. And so I think, I think part of what we're doing here is hoping that we can open that conversation more for people.
I love it. I think it absolutely does. And coming from someone who, you and me both haven't had a actual paycheck from a regular job in 7 years, I'm listening to the podcast and learning a ton about entrepreneurship from it, because at the end of the day, you're all in, you're doing different industries, but you're having so many similar issues that you can take from one another. So I like to say you don't know what you don't know. And I think this platform hopefully continues to help people learn things and avoid the pitfalls that cost all the money, because God knows we've had a lot of people along our way who've done the same for us.
Last question to end it. What are you most excited about over like the next 3 to 5 years?
Honestly, it's actually the fact that I think there's going to be a lot of optimism coming out of the changes that are happening in the market, right? For the first time, we're recording in 2022, there's a lot of people starting to really question the status quo. And I think that is an excellent thing for society. I think way too many of the companies have been established for so long. They are at that point, they're no longer startups, right? The term startup, I don't think is accurate, because I heard them calling like billion-dollar companies startups that have thousands of employees. Those aren't startups anymore. So I think what's going to happen nowadays is I'm actually really, really excited, because I think because of the remote work experience, because people are moving jobs way more, because people are traveling, because technology is getting more and more connected, I really think there's going to be a boom in entrepreneurship, and I hope to see it come to fruition, because I really, really think incredible ideas, incredible entrepreneurs are going to come out of this moment in time, and I'm excited to kind of be a part of it, but also watch it from an outsider too.
Thank you for listening. It really means a lot to us. We want to hear from you as we keep growing. Please reach out on whyquit.co if you have any feedback or potential guests. A special thanks to Chris Dole for the music. Please check out his newest album, Here's to You, on Spotify. Thank you, and we will be back next week with another episode.